There are moments in history when one human being changes not only borders, but the direction of civilization itself. Tonight, we explore one of those lives. But this lesson is not only about history. It is about sharpening your listening skill at an advanced level. It is about training your ear to understand academic English spoken with clarity, depth, and authority. When you listen carefully to structured historical narration, you develop concentration. You strengthen vocabulary in context. You improve pronunciation awareness. And you train your mind to follow complex ideas without losing focus. That is powerful learning.
At Amex English, we believe that language should not be separated from knowledge. When you study serious topics, your English becomes richer. When you challenge your thinking, your listening becomes sharper. Today, you are doing two important things at the same time. You are expanding your understanding of world history, and you are strengthening your advanced listening ability. This is not passive listening. This is intellectual training.
So prepare yourself. Listen actively. Follow the structure. Notice transitions. Pay attention to tone and pacing. Because the story we are about to explore is not simple. It is layered. It is strategic. It is human.
We now travel back more than 2,000 years to a kingdom once underestimated, to a young king educated by philosophers, to a commander who would march across continents.
His name was Alexander. History remembers him as Alexander the Great.
But what does greatness truly mean? Is it measured in territory, in ambition, in legacy?
Let us begin. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the Greek world was politically fractured and strategically vulnerable. Athens had declined from its golden age of intellectual brilliance. Sparta had exhausted its military dominance through continuous rivalry. Alliances shifted, trust weakened, competition replaced unity. While the southern city-states argued over influence, a northern kingdom quietly reorganized itself with extraordinary discipline. Macedon had long been dismissed as peripheral and culturally inferior. Yet under King Philip II, that perception began to dissolve. Philip understood that survival required innovation. He transformed the Macedonian army into a professional, permanently trained force. He redesigned the traditional spear into the sarissa, a weapon so long that it extended the reach of his infantry far beyond conventional limits. The phalanx became a moving wall of precision and coordination. But Philip's genius extended beyond weapons. He combined military reform with diplomatic intelligence. He used marriage alliances to secure loyalty. He negotiated where possible and attacked where necessary. Gradually, Macedon extended influence across Greece. Resistance weakened, authority consolidated. Standing beside Philip during these transformative years was his son, Alexander. From adolescence, Alexander observed negotiations, campaigns, and the delicate balance between fear and loyalty. At 13, he was entrusted to Aristotle. Under this philosopher's guidance, Alexander studied ethics, politics, medicine, literature, and scientific reasoning. He absorbed Homeric ideals of heroism. He learned to question, to analyze, to imagine systems beyond immediate power. This dual education created something rare. He was trained to command armies. He was also trained to contemplate civilization itself.
In 336 BCE, Philip was assassinated. The stability he built trembled instantly. Alexander was 20 years old. Youth can inspire hope, but it can also invite challenge. Rival factions questioned his authority. Greek city-states sensed opportunity for independence. Rebellion became a possibility. Alexander responded not with hesitation, but with decisive clarity. He secured his position in Macedon. He moved south, When Thebes revolted, he crushed the uprising with uncompromising force. The destruction of Thebes was severe. It was also strategic. It sent a message across Greece that instability would not be tolerated. Yet severity alone does not explain his next move. Alexander's ambition extended beyond Greece. He envisioned an expedition into Asia against the Persian Empire, a power that had once invaded Greek territory and continued to interfere in Greek politics. By presenting his campaign as both liberation and justified retaliation, he unified the Greek forces under a shared objective. In 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. This crossing was symbolic as much as military. He stepped into lands associated with myth and memory. According to tradition, he honored the heroes of Troy, aligning himself with epic narratives that elevated his mission beyond politics. But symbolism does not guarantee victory. War would test preparation.
The first great test came at the Granicus River. Persian satraps, confident in numerical superiority, positioned their forces along the riverbank. The terrain favored defense. Many advisors recommended caution. Alexander chose calculated boldness. He led a cavalry charge across the river, disrupting Persian coordination before full deployment. Combat was direct and dangerous. At one moment, he nearly lost his life in close engagement. Yet discipline and training prevailed. The Persian defensive structure fractured. Asia Minor began to open. Momentum, however, must be managed carefully. Alexander advanced along the coast, securing port cities one by one. This prevented Persian naval forces from threatening his supply lines. Each decision reflected long-term planning rather than reckless aggression. In 333 BCE, near Issus, he encountered King Darius III. The Persian army outnumbered the Macedonians significantly, yet geography narrowed the battlefield, limiting the advantage of numbers. Alexander recognized vulnerability in the Persian center and advanced toward Darius directly. When the king fled, psychological collapse followed. The army disintegrated. Issus marked not only a tactical victory, but the beginning of imperial unraveling.
After Issus, Alexander faced a strategic choice: pursue Darius immediately or secure the Mediterranean coast. He chose patience. Persian naval strength remained a threat. Coastal control was essential for long-term stability. The siege of Tyre demonstrated relentless determination and engineering ingenuity. The city stood on an island fortress. Instead of abandoning the objective, Alexander ordered construction of a massive causeway connecting the mainland to the island. Months of labor altered geography itself. When Tyre fell, resistance across the region weakened dramatically. Egypt presented a different scenario. Persian rule there had been resented. Alexander entered not as destroyer but as liberator. He respected local religious traditions and participated in ceremonial recognition as pharaoh. This adaptability revealed political intelligence beyond battlefield strategy. It was in Egypt that he founded Alexandria. Positioned strategically along the Mediterranean, the city would become a center of trade, scholarship, and intellectual exchange. Though he would not live to witness its full development, the foundation symbolized his broader vision. He was not only dismantling an empire, he was constructing a new world order.
By 331 BCE, the confrontation between Alexander and Darius III had become inevitable. The earlier defeat at Issus had damaged Persian prestige, but it had not yet destroyed imperial capacity. Darius gathered a vast army from across his territories: cavalry from Central Asia, infantry from Mesopotamia, war chariots equipped with blades designed to cut through dense formations. The battlefield near Gaugamela was deliberately flattened to maximize mobility and numerical advantage. The scale of the Persian force was intimidating. Ancient sources may exaggerate numbers, but even conservative estimates confirm that Alexander faced a significantly larger army. Many commanders in his position would have hesitated, yet hesitation was not characteristic of Alexander's temperament. He studied the terrain, he analyzed Persian deployment, he anticipated their attempt to outflank his smaller army. Instead of meeting force with rigid defense, he maneuvered diagonally across the field, stretching Persian lines and creating a gap in their center. Timing was critical. Discipline was absolute. When the opening appeared, Alexander led a concentrated cavalry strike directly toward Darius. Leadership, once again, became the decisive factor. As at Issus, Darius fled the battlefield. His departure triggered collapse within Persian ranks. The battle ended not simply in defeat, but in irreversible destabilization. Gaugamela was more than a victory. It was the effective end of the Persian Empire as a dominant political structure.
After Gaugamela, the symbolic heart of Persian authority lay exposed. Babylon surrendered without resistance. Susa opened its gates. Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian kings, fell into Alexander's hands. The immense treasuries accumulated over generations were now under Macedonian control. Yet, conquest brought a new challenge. It is one matter to defeat an empire. It is another to govern it. Alexander faced territories vast in geography and diverse in culture. Languages differed, religious practices varied, administrative systems were complex and deeply rooted in tradition. Rather than dismantle everything Persian, Alexander adopted elements of the existing structure. He retained local officials in many regions. He respected administrative continuity. At the same time, he placed Macedonian officers in key strategic positions. This blend of preservation and replacement reflected pragmatic intelligence. However, adaptation created tension. Some Macedonian soldiers viewed the adoption of Persian dress and ceremony as betrayal. They feared cultural dilution. They questioned whether their king was abandoning his identity. Alexander, meanwhile, envisioned something larger than ethnic loyalty. He imagined a fusion of East and West, a unified ruling class that transcended traditional boundaries. Whether this vision was idealistic or politically calculated remains debated, but it undeniably altered the nature of his empire.
Power, when expanded rapidly, often intensifies internal strain. As Alexander pursued Darius eastward into the interior of Persia, resistance shifted from formal imperial armies to regional opposition. Darius was eventually killed by his own satraps, who sought to negotiate favor with the advancing Macedonian king. Alexander punished the conspirators, portraying himself as the legitimate successor to Persian authority rather than its destroyer. This symbolic transition mattered. He was no longer merely a conqueror from abroad. He positioned himself as King of Asia. The title carried both political ambition and ideological transformation. Campaigns in Bactria and Sogdiana proved difficult. The terrain was harsh. Resistance was decentralized. Guerrilla tactics replaced structured battle formations. Victory required endurance and adaptability rather than dramatic confrontation. During this period, Alexander encouraged marriages between his officers and Persian nobility. He himself married Roxana of Bactria. These unions were not purely romantic gestures, they were strategic attempts to integrate elites and reduce rebellion through shared lineage. Yet, integration did not eliminate tension. Several plots emerged among his officers. The execution of close companions revealed the psychological pressure of prolonged command. Alexander's temperament, shaped by ambition and continuous success, grew increasingly intense.
At this stage, Alexander's empire stretched farther than any previous Greek ruler had imagined. Yet ambition had not diminished. Reports of lands beyond Persia, of India and vast rivers unknown to the Mediterranean world, stirred his imagination. He advanced once more. The invasion of northwestern India confronted him with new military realities. The Battle of Hydaspes against King Porus demonstrated once again his tactical flexibility. War elephants, unfamiliar to Macedonian forces, required rapid adaptation.
Victory was achieved, but at significant cost. Years of continuous campaigning had exhausted the army. Climate differed dramatically from the Mediterranean environment. Monsoon rains and unfamiliar geography weakened morale. When Alexander proposed advancing further east beyond the Hyphasis River, his soldiers refused. This refusal was not mutiny born of disloyalty. It was the voice of human limitation. Endurance has boundaries. Even extraordinary leadership cannot erase physical exhaustion indefinitely. For the first time in his career, Alexander confronted not enemy resistance, but the collective will of his own men. He turned back, not defeated in battle, but confronted by reality.
Turning back from India did not mean retreat in humiliation. It marked the beginning of a different kind of challenge. The march westward would test endurance more severely than many battles had tested courage. Alexander divided his forces, sending part of the army by sea while he led another contingent across the Gedrosian Desert, a harsh and unforgiving landscape. The decision remains controversial among historians. Some interpret it as strategic exploration. Others see it as an attempt to surpass earlier Persian kings who had failed in the same region. What is certain is that the march through the desert brought immense suffering. Heat, dehydration, and logistical breakdown reduced morale. Soldiers who had survived countless battles now faced an enemy without form, nature itself. Leadership during hardship reveals character with greater clarity than leadership during victory. Alexander shared the conditions of his troops. When offered water carried in a helmet during extreme thirst, he poured it onto the ground rather than drink alone. The gesture was symbolic, reinforcing solidarity. Yet symbolism could not eliminate exhaustion. By the time the army reassembled in the Persian heartland, the empire had expanded to extraordinary scale. From Greece to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, territories of immense diversity were under Macedonian authority. The question that now emerged was not how to conquer, but how to sustain.
Sustaining such a vast empire required administrative coherence. Alexander initiated reforms designed to unify elites across cultural boundaries. In Susa, he organized mass marriages between Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen. This event symbolized his long-standing vision of integration. He encouraged adoption of certain Persian court customs, attempting to merge ruling traditions rather than erase them. These policies, however, intensified tension among his Macedonian companions. Some viewed proskynesis, the Persian gesture of bowing before a ruler, as incompatible with Greek concepts of equality among nobles. They feared that the king they had followed across continents was distancing himself from their shared identity. At the same time, new cities bearing the name Alexandria continued to function as administrative and military centers. These foundations were not accidental. They secured trade routes, facilitated communication, and extended cultural exchange. Greek language increasingly became the medium of governance across vast territories. Yet, behind structural reforms lay psychological strain. Years of continuous command, combined with immense responsibility, altered Alexander's temperament. Episodes of anger and suspicion became more visible. The execution of trusted officers under accusations of conspiracy reflected both the fragility of power and the isolation of supreme authority.
Isolation is an often overlooked dimension of absolute leadership. As Alexander's empire expanded, the circle of individuals he could trust narrowed. His closest companion, Hephaestion, died suddenly in 324 BCE. The loss deeply affected him. Ancient accounts describe intense grief. Whether exaggerated or not, the emotional impact was significant. Grief, combined with exhaustion and unresolved political tension, created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Nevertheless, Alexander continued planning new campaigns. Arabia became a proposed objective. Exploration of maritime routes expanded. His ambition had not diminished. If anything, it had evolved from conquest toward consolidation and further expansion. Babylon became the administrative center of this immense empire. The city's strategic location made it ideal for coordinating territories stretching in every direction. Delegations arrived from across the known world. The atmosphere suggested not decline, but preparation for further ambition. And then, unexpectedly, illness intervened. In 323 BCE, after days of fever, Alexander died at the age of 32. The precise cause remains debated. Disease, poisoning, complications from previous injuries. Historical certainty is elusive. What is undeniable is the abruptness. An empire built through relentless motion suddenly lost its center.
The immediate aftermath exposed the fragility beneath apparent strength. Alexander left no clear adult successor capable of commanding universal loyalty. His generals, powerful and ambitious in their own right, faced the problem of succession without consensus. The empire did not collapse overnight, but unity fractured gradually into competing territories ruled by former commanders. These men, later known as the successors, divided the empire into regional kingdoms. Conflict followed, alliances shifted, stability became relative rather than absolute. Yet, while political unity dissolved, cultural transformation endured. Greek language, art, and intellectual traditions continued to spread across Egypt, the Levant, and large portions of Asia. Local traditions interacted with Hellenic influence, producing hybrid forms of architecture, philosophy, and governance. The world that emerged after Alexander was not simply Macedonian, it was Hellenistic. This transformation may represent his most enduring achievement. Empires based purely on force often vanish without trace. Cultural synthesis, however, travels across generations. And so, we arrive at a profound historical question. Was Alexander's greatness defined by the territories he conquered, or by the worlds that evolved after his death?
When Alexander died, the political structure he constructed began to fragment. Yet fragmentation should not be confused with disappearance. His generals, powerful commanders who had followed him across continents, divided the empire into major regions. Ptolemy secured Egypt. Seleucus controlled vast territories in Asia. Antigonus and his descendants governed Macedonia and parts of Greece. This division marked the beginning of what historians call the Hellenistic Age. The term derives from Hellas, the Greek word for Greece, but the era itself extended far beyond Greek geography. It was characterized not by uniform rule, but by interaction. Greek became the language of administration, diplomacy, and intellectual life across much of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Markets functioned across cultural boundaries. Trade routes connected regions that had previously operated in relative isolation. Ideas began to travel more freely than armies. Perhaps the most powerful symbol of this transformation was the city of Alexandria in Egypt. Founded by Alexander, it developed into one of the greatest intellectual centers of the ancient world. Scholars gathered there to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy. The Library of Alexandria attempted something unprecedented, the systematic collection of human knowledge. Such ambition reveals that conquest alone was not the final outcome of Alexander's campaigns. Cultural transmission became equally significant.
Cultural transmission, however, does not eliminate moral complexity. It is important to maintain analytical balance. Alexander's campaigns involved destruction as well as construction. Cities such as Tyre experienced devastating sieges. Thousands died in battle. Populations were displaced. Greatness in history is rarely pure. It is layered and contradictory. One individual can be both visionary and destructive, strategic and impulsive. Alexander's personality reflected this duality. His courage inspired loyalty. His ambition drove expansion. Yet his temper sometimes produced severe decisions. The execution of officers accused of conspiracy illustrates the tension between authority and trust. For advanced learners of English, examining such complexity strengthens critical thinking. Vocabulary associated with history carries depth. Words like legacy, succession, integration, consolidation, and cultural synthesis are not superficial terms. They require reflection and contextual understanding. Now, consider the broader impact. The Hellenistic kingdoms that followed Alexander did not replicate his unity, yet they fostered exchange between Greek and Eastern traditions. Artistic styles blended, religious practices influenced one another, scientific inquiry expanded through shared knowledge networks. In this sense, Alexander's empire dissolved politically, but endured intellectually.
Endurance is perhaps the most revealing measure of historical influence. Territorial borders shift across centuries. Political systems rise and fall. Yet language, philosophy, and cultural interaction can persist long after armies disappear. The spread of Koine Greek, a common dialect used across Hellenistic territories, facilitated communication across vast regions. Merchants, scholars, and administrators operated within shared linguistic frameworks. This linguistic unity later influenced the transmission of religious and philosophical texts that shaped subsequent civilizations. We must therefore ask a disciplined question. Did Alexander intend such cultural transformation, or did it emerge as an unintended consequence of military expansion? Historians debate this issue. Some argue that his policies of intermarriage and administrative inclusion reflect deliberate vision. Others suggest that cultural fusion developed organically after his death. Regardless of intention, the outcome altered world history. The Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds became more interconnected than ever before.
And here, as we approach the conclusion of this exploration, the concept of greatness demands careful definition. Is greatness measured by speed of conquest, by geographic expansion, by personal charisma, or by the durability of influence across generations? Alexander's life lasted only 32 years, yet his structures and exchanges initiated during that brief period influenced politics, language, and intellectual development for centuries. For you, as an advanced English learner, this story offers more than historical knowledge. It trains sustained listening. It exposes you to analytical vocabulary. It challenges you to follow chronological development and interpret significance beyond surface facts. You have practiced processing complex sentences. You have encountered academic phrasing. You have listened to shifts in tone between description and analysis. This is how listening skill deepens, through attention, through patience, through serious content. History sharpens language, language sharpens thought, and thought shapes understanding.
As we step back from the final campaigns and the sudden death in Babylon, we must confront a deeper historical reality. Alexander built an empire that stretched across 3 continents, yet he left behind no stable system capable of surviving without him. His authority was personal, not institutional. His leadership was charismatic, not constitutional. When he died in 323 BCE, uncertainty filled the empire. There was no mature successor prepared to command such vast territories. His generals, powerful and ambitious in their own right, quickly moved to secure influence. What followed was not unity, but division.
The empire fragmented into competing kingdoms ruled by his former commanders. Conflict replaced cohesion. Rivalry replaced shared purpose. Yet something remarkable endured beneath the political instability. The cities Alexander founded continued to function as centers of trade and learning. Greek language spread across Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Philosophical ideas traveled further than armies ever could. Scientific inquiry flourished in places like Alexandria. This was the birth of the Hellenistic world.
And here lies the historical paradox. His political empire collapsed, but his cultural influence expanded. Military conquest created temporary borders. Cultural exchange created lasting transformation. Greek and Eastern traditions blended in architecture, religion, governance, and scholarship. The intellectual climate of the Mediterranean world was permanently altered. Was this outcome intentional, or was it an unintended consequence of ambition?
Perhaps greatness in history is not measured only by stability. Perhaps it is measured by influence. Alexander's sovereignty ended with his death. His hegemony dissolved into rivalry. But his legacy shaped generations long after the armies stopped marching. History invites us to examine both triumph and limitation. It challenges us to think critically. And that is why studying such figures strengthens not only knowledge but judgment.
Now we pass to the lesson vocabulary. Listen carefully to these 10 essential academic words. Ambition, a powerful internal drive to achieve success or distinction, often beyond ordinary limits. Conquest, the act of defeating and taking control of a territory through military force. Empire, a large political system in which one authority governs diverse lands and peoples. Legacy, the lasting impact or influence that remains after a person's life has ended. Hegemony, dominant influence or leadership exercised by one state or group over others. Consolidation, the process of strengthening and organizing power after expansion. Succession, the transfer of authority from one ruler or leader to another. Fragmentation, the breaking apart of a political or social structure into smaller competing parts. Cultural diffusion, the spread of ideas, customs, and beliefs between societies through contact. Sovereignty, supreme authority of a state to govern itself without external control.
These words are not simply definitions to memorize. They are instruments of thought. When you understand them, you begin to hear history differently. When you train your listening through complex material, you discipline your attention. When you challenge yourself with advanced vocabulary, you sharpen your mind. This is how serious learners grow. This is how confident speakers are formed.
If this lesson strengthened both your historical understanding and your listening skill, then continue this intellectual training with Amex English. Do not choose easy content. Choose depth. Choose complexity. Choose material that forces you to concentrate. Because every time you listen carefully to structured academic English, you are strengthening your mental endurance. You are building precision. You are developing analytical clarity.
Support this channel if you value serious learning. Like this lesson. Share it with someone who wants to sharpen their listening and critical thinking. Subscribe to Amex English and return regularly to challenge yourself with advanced historical and analytical topics. Your mind grows stronger through disciplined listening.
Now, one final question for you. In your judgment, was Alexander remembered as the Great because of power or because of influence? Write your answer in the comments. We will read your reflections carefully, and together we will continue sharpening both language and thought.